Some stories aren't meant to be told, but this one needs to be heard. It started with something small, something almost unnoticeable, until it wasn't. Before we uncover the truth, make sure you're subscribed for more unforgettable stories. And if you enjoy mysterious twists, drop A in the comments. Here's what happened.
She didn't come back to fight for him. She came back to give him away. 9 months ago, Amelia Santos was dragged out of the Corsini mansion like garbage, pregnant and alone. The Mafia boss's sister called her a whore, threw money in her face, and had her thrown out before she could say goodbye. Now she stands at his iron gate again in the freezing New York winter, her lips blue from the cold, her body wasted from illness, holding the one thing that could destroy them both, a baby boy with unmistakable Corsini gray eyes. She doesn't knock. She doesn't beg. She leaves the child on the frozen concrete and walks away into the snow, disappearing like a ghost with unfinished business. Kieran Corsini is one of the most powerful and ruthless mafia bosses on the East Coast. He thought he could forget her. He was wrong. The moment he sees his son's face, everything changes. Guilt becomes obsession, silence becomes action, and the woman who wanted nothing from him, the woman who's now dying in a rotting apartment in South Bronx, becomes the one thing he can't live without. But Amelia isn't the same broken girl he once knew. She's not coming back for him. She's not coming back for his money or his power. If she comes back at all, it'll be for one reason only: her son. And she'd rather die than let anyone make her feel like garbage again. This is a story about the children we abandon and the women we fail. About monsters who learn to love and broken souls who learn to trust again. About second chances that cost everything. If you're ready for a dark romance that'll break you before it heals you, stay until the end. Don't forget to like, share this story with someone who loves mafia romance, and subscribe for more stories that hit different. Now let's go back to that freezing night when everything began. Frank DeLuca had worked the front gate security for the Corsini family for 15 years, but never had his hands trembled the way they did tonight as he stared at the camera monitor. The figure standing at the familiar iron gate was heartbreakingly recognizable, even thinner, even more unsteady, looking like she might collapse at any second in 10-degree below zero snow. Amelia Santos, the girl he'd believed he'd never see again. He remembered that day as if it had happened yesterday. The day Miss Gianna summoned all the staff to the main hall so they could witness a lesson. Amelia had stood there, face drained of color, one hand pressed to her stomach in a gesture Frank hadn't understood then but understood all too well now. She'd begged, her voice shaking, asking for only 5 minutes to see Kieran, to explain. But Gianna had laughed, that laugh as cold as steel, and ordered the guards to drag her out. Frank had stood there, doing nothing, saying nothing, only watching as she was hauled through the gate he was supposed to guard. He'd hated himself ever since that day. On the screen, Amelia bent down and set something on the snow-dusted concrete, then straightened. She stood motionless for a moment, her shoulders trembling, whether from the cold or from crying he couldn't tell, then turned and walked away into the blinding white of the snowfall. She didn't look back. She didn't hesitate. Frank bolted from the guard room and ran for the gate as fast as he could. The wind carved into his face like knives, but he didn't care. He reached the spot where Amelia had been standing, looked down, and his heart seemed to stop. A baby, a newborn wrapped in an old blue blanket, lying on the concrete in the middle of a New York winter night. Frank dropped to his knees, his shaking hands lifting the edge of the blanket. A tiny face, eyes squeezed shut, that flushed pink-red skin newborns have, and a piece of paper tucked into the folds, the handwriting unsteady, the ink smeared as if the person who wrote it had cried while writing. "My name is Liam. I was born on December 15th. I'm his son. I've got nothing left to give him but this truth. Please love him for me. E." Frank read it again and again 3 times, his heart pounding hard inside his chest. His son. Kieran Corsini's son. He looked back at the baby's face, and now he saw it clearly. Those features, that chin, even the way the lips pressed together in sleep. It was all Corsini. He rose, gathering the baby into his arms, shielding him from the cutting wind with his own body. By procedure, he should have reported to Miss Gianna first. She managed everything in the house when Kieran was tied up with work. But Frank remembered Amelia's eyes that day, remembered the way Gianna had thrown money in her face, remembered Amelia's pleading that nobody had bothered to hear. No, not this time. He wasn't going to make that mistake again. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through his contacts, and tapped the number. Ordinary staff were never allowed to call directly. Kieran Corsini's number. The phone rang 3 times before someone picked up, and the cold, dangerous voice of the boss came through the line. "Who is this?" Frank drew a deep breath. "Sir, this is Frank DeLuca, Main Gate Security. You need to come out here right now. Someone left a baby at the gate." Silence stretched. Then Kieran's voice. No longer cold now, but tight with something that made the air feel too thin. "A baby." "Yes, sir. And I think." Frank looked down at the tiny face in his arms, at the eyes that had just opened, gray as a sky before a storm, gray as the eyes of the man listening to him on the other end of the call. "I think you need to see this baby's face." Kieran didn't even have time to put on a coat. He stormed out of the mansion into 10-degree below-zero winter night air wearing only a black dress shirt, the wind slicing into his skin like thousands of knives. But he didn't feel a thing. His feet pounded across the snow-covered path, his heart raging in his chest, his mind spinning with thoughts he didn't dare believe were real. Frank stood at the gate, cradling a bundle of blue cloth in his arms, the older guard's face drawn tight under the yellow light. Kieran stopped a few steps away, staring at that bundle, and the world around him seemed to stop turning. A baby. A newborn with flushed pink-red skin and tiny lips moving softly in sleep. Frank handed the baby to him without a word, only passing along a crumpled scrap of paper. Kieran took it, his eyes skimming the trembling handwritten lines, the ink blurred by tears. "My name is Liam. I was born on December 15th. I'm your son." The letter E at the end hit him like a knife driven straight through his chest. E. Amelia. Kieran looked down at the baby's face, and he didn't need any DNA test to know the truth. The eyes had just opened, gray as a sky before a storm. The same color he saw every day in the mirror. The square chin, the sharp lines, all of it, the legacy of the Corsini bloodline passed through 3 generations. This was his son. This was his flesh and blood. And Amelia had been pregnant when she was thrown out of here 9 months ago. Rage erupted in Kieran like a fire that burned everything in its path. Who did this? Who hid it from him? Who forced the woman he'd once held in his arms to leave their child in a freezing winter night as if she had no other choice left? He pulled the baby close, shielding him from the wind with his own body, then turned to Frank. "Which way did she go?" "Sir, she went east, into the snow. I didn't have time. Call Theo Brennan. Right now. Tell him to be in my office in 15 minutes. Kieran walked back, holding his son to his chest, every step heavy with questions that had no answers. 9 months. Where had she been for 9 months? How had she lived? Why hadn't she found a way to contact him? And why? Why did she have to set their child down on frozen concrete, as if it was the only choice she had left? He carried Liam into the mansion, called a nurse to check the baby's health, then went into his office. His hand held the phone as he dialed a number he knew by heart. Gianna's sleepy voice came through after the second ring. "Kieran, do you know what time it is?" 3 in the morning. Kieran cut her off, his voice as cold as the winter outside. "You're coming to my office. Right now. What are you saying? What's going on?" "Right now, Gianna. Or I'll have someone drag you here." He ended the call without waiting for an answer. Then he sat down in his chair and stared at the crumpled note in his hand, reading Amelia's shaking lines again and again. "Please love him for me." For me, as if she wasn't here to do it anymore, as if she'd given up all hope, as if she was dying. Kieran crushed the paper in his fist until his knuckles went white. Someone was going to pay for this, and he had a feeling he knew exactly who that someone was. Gianna walked into the office 15 minutes after the call, her face still carrying the faint marks of sleep torn away too fast. But she'd already managed light makeup and a set of expensive silk clothes. She was always like that. Always flawless. Always in control. Always the image of a powerful woman in the Corsini family. But her steps faltered the instant she saw what Kieran was holding. The baby, a newborn sleeping quietly in her younger brother's arms, cheeks flushed pink-red, lips gently moving, completely unaware of the storm about to break inside this room. "What is that?" Gianna asked, her voice trying to stay steady. But Kieran heard the tremor underneath. "You know what it is." Kieran didn't stand, didn't raise his voice. He only looked at her with gray eyes cold as steel. "The question is, how long have you known?" "What are you talking about? I don't understand." "Don't." One word, but heavy enough to stop Gianna cold. "Don't insult my intelligence, Gianna. Not right now." He laid the baby down in the temporary crib the nurse had just brought in, then rose and walked toward his sister. Each step was a silent threat. "Amelia Santos. Do you remember her?" Gianna swallowed, but lifted her chin. "That maid? Of course I remember. I threw her out 9 months ago because she didn't know how to stay in her place." "You threw her out," Kieran repeated it, his voice so flat it was frightening. "Tell me exactly what you did." "I protected you. I protected this family." Gianna tried to pull herself back into the confidence she wore like armor. "That girl was just a Puerto Rican maid trying to latch onto your money. She thought climbing into the boss's bed meant she could change her life. I gave her $5,000 and told her to disappear. That was far too generous for someone like her." "You threw money in her face." Kieran said it. Not a question, a statement, in front of the entire staff. Gianna blinked and took a small step back. "Who told you?" "You had men drag her out through the gate. She begged for 5 minutes to see me. 5 minutes, and you refused. You were in Italy. You were busy dealing with the war with the Benedetti family. I didn't want you distracted by a maid's drama." "A maid's drama." Kieran laughed, but the sound was colder than the winter wind outside. "You're calling the mother of my son a maid's drama." Gianna went pale. "Your son? You can't be sure that baby is." "Look at him." Kieran pointed at the crib. "Look at his face and tell me he's not mine. Can you?" Gianna didn't look. She didn't need to. From the moment she walked in and saw the baby, she'd known. Those gray eyes couldn't belong to anyone else. What else? Kieran stepped closer, until only a few inches separated them. "What else did you do besides throwing her out?" Silence. Her visa. Who canceled it? The silence stretched longer, but Kieran didn't need the answer. He already had it. "You used the family's lawyer to cancel her work visa. You turned her into an illegal immigrant overnight. You blocked her number from my phone. You ordered every staff member not to contact her." Each sentence was an accusation, and Gianna backed up another step with each one. "And when I asked, you said she left on her own. You said she took the money and vanished. You said she didn't want anything to do with a Mafia family." "I protected you," Gianna shouted, losing control for the first time. "That girl would have ruined you. She would have ruined everything our father built. What do you think the other families would say if they found out Kieran Corsini was involved with a maid? Do you think they'd respect you? She was pregnant." Kieran said it slowly, each word heavy as stone. "She was carrying my child when you threw her out into the street. Did you know that?" Gianna didn't answer, but her silence was answer enough. "You knew." Kieran nodded, and now his voice wasn't angry anymore. It was numbingly cold. "You knew she was pregnant and you still threw her out. You knew she was carrying your nephew and you still made her illegal. You still made her homeless. That baby might not even be yours. She was a maid. Who knows how many men she slept with." "Get out of my house." Gianna froze. "What?" "Get out of my house. Right now. And don't come back until I allow it." "Kieran, you can't do this. I'm your sister. I'm the only one who's been by your side all these years. I saved your life, and I let you control my life for 8 years because of that." Kieran cut her off. "But it's over. Get out, Gianna. Before I do something we'll both regret." Gianna stood there for a few more seconds, her eyes bright with anger and disbelief. But she knew her brother. She knew when he meant it. And tonight, for the first time in 8 years, she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Hatred. She turned and walked out without another word. Kieran stood alone in the silence, listening to her footsteps fade, listening to a door slam, listening to an engine start and roll away from the mansion. Then he turned back to the baby sleeping in the crib, his son, the child he almost never would have known existed. "I'll find your mother," he whispered. "I promise." 3 in the morning passed, then 4, then 5. Kieran didn't sleep. He sat in an armchair in the room that had been hastily cleared and turned into a temporary nursery, Liam in his arms, staring at the tiny face, sleeping peacefully under the soft yellow light. The baby stirred now and then, lips moving as if searching for something. Maybe the warmth of his mother, maybe the familiar scent he'd lost a few hours ago. Kieran held him tighter, trying to fill that empty space, even though he knew he couldn't. In the quiet dark, memories crashed over him like a flood, fragments he'd tried to bury for 9 months rising up now, unstoppable. Amelia. He remembered the first time he truly saw her. Not as he saw a maid, but as he saw a human being. It was a night he couldn't sleep, after a tense meeting with the capos, and he went down to the kitchen at 2 a.m. and found her sitting with a book by the kitchen table. She'd panicked and stood up, apologizing because she hadn't known the boss was still awake, ready to leave. But he told her to sit, and they talked. About the book she was reading, about life, about things that had nothing to do with mafia or power or blood spilled. For the first time in years, Kieran felt like he was being spoken to like a normal man. After that, on the nights that followed, he started finding excuses to go down to the kitchen at the same hour. She was there too, as if she was waiting. They talked about everything and nothing. She told him about Puerto Rico, about her mother who'd died, about her dream of opening a small bakery. He listened, and realized it was something he'd never done with anyone. Then there was her smile when she brought coffee up to his room every morning. Not the obedient smile of a maid, but the warm smile of someone who knew exactly how he liked his coffee, black with no sugar, who knew he hated being disturbed before 8 a.m. but still slipped in, set the cup on his desk, and left without making a sound. He started waking earlier just to see her for a few seconds. Then the first night they crossed the line. He remembered it perfectly. A stormy, rainy night. She brought a warm blanket to his room because she worried he'd be cold, and he pulled her in and didn't let go. That night he looked into her eyes and saw something he'd forgotten the feeling of. Trust. Tenderness. Love that didn't demand anything. They'd had 3 months. 3 months in secret. 3 months stealing moments inside the dark. 3 months where he felt like a man instead of a monster. Then the war with the Benedetti family erupted, and he had to go to Italy. On the last night before he left, he held her and promised. 2 months. Just 2 months. I'll come back. She smiled, but her eyes were sad. I'll wait. He didn't keep that promise. Not because he didn't want to, but because when he came back, she wasn't there to wait anymore. Gianna said she'd left, said she'd taken the money and disappeared, said she didn't want anything to do with a mafia family, and he believed it. He believed it because believing was easier than admitting he'd loved a maid, easier than facing the truth that the most powerful mafia boss on the East Coast had been left behind by a girl, easier than accepting that he wasn't good enough to keep the only person who'd made him feel human. So he buried it, buried the memory of her, buried what he felt for her, shoved it all deep down and pretended it had never happened. He went back to being a monster, colder, more ruthless, as if that could erase what it felt like to be human. But he didn't forget. There wasn't a single day he didn't think of her. There wasn't a single night he didn't dream of her smile. He was just good at pretending. And now, holding his son in his arms, Kieran understood the price of that cowardice. She'd been pregnant when he left. She'd been alone, carrying his child, thrown out like trash, stripped of everything, pushed into the dark. 9 months. 9 months. What had she endured while he slept in $1 million bed and pretended she'd never existed? Liam shifted in his arms, and Kieran looked down and saw those tiny gray eyes open and stare up at him. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice tightening. I'm sorry I didn't protect your mother. I'm sorry I was a coward. The first light of dawn slipped through the curtains, and Kieran made a decision. He was going to find Amelia. He was going to bring her home. And this time, he wasn't going to be a coward anymore. 72 hours. 72 hours that felt as long as a lifetime. Kieran didn't sleep, didn't eat. He only waited and cared for Liam while Theo Brennan tore all of New York apart looking for Amelia. And now, the man Kieran trusted most was standing in front of him in the office, holding a thin file folder, his face tight, in a way Kieran had never once seen in the 10 years they'd worked side by side. Theo Brennan was a former FBI investigator before he came over to the Corsini family. He'd seen everything, from murder scenes to the darkest secrets of the underworld. But today, when he opened the folder, his hand shook slightly. I found her, Theo said, his voice rough. But you're not going to like what I have to report. Kieran sat straighter, gray eyes cold as steel. Talk. Amelia Santos is currently living in the South Bronx, Mott Haven. Theo flipped to the first page of the file. A 5th-floor studio apartment. In a building with no elevator, no central heat, no official manager. It's an area packed with undocumented immigrants. A place where nobody asks for papers. Nobody cares who lives or dies. Kieran gripped the arm of his chair but said nothing, signaling Theo to continue. After she was thrown out of here, she couldn't work because her visa had been canceled. No landlord would rent to her legally because she didn't have papers. She did everything to survive. Theo turned to the next page. Washing dishes at a Chinese restaurant in Chinatown. Paid in cash, $4 an hour. Cleaning rooms at a cheap hotel in Queens. Night shift, no contract, no insurance. Sometimes taking hourly house cleaning jobs for whoever needed it. Any job that paid cash, she took it. Kieran felt nausea rise in his throat. Amelia, the girl who'd once been in his arms, who'd once smiled at him, who'd once made him feel human, had been forced to dig through trash just to stay alive. Where did she have the baby? He asked, his voice hoarse. Theo was silent for a moment before he answered. A charity clinic, St. Barnabas. It's where people go when they've got no insurance, no money, no one. He flipped to another page, and Kieran saw a copied medical record. She came in after being in labor for more than 15 hours. Natural delivery, but there were complications. Severe postpartum hemorrhage. She almost died on the delivery table. Almost died? Kieran repeated, his voice like it was being strangled. They had to do an emergency blood transfusion. She should have stayed in the hospital at least a week for monitoring, but she didn't have the money. She signed herself out early after only 2 days, and took the baby back to a room with no heat in December. Theo set a photograph on the desk. This is the room she's living in. Kieran looked down at the photo and felt like someone had punched him in the gut. The room was so small you could cross it in 3 steps. Black mold stained the walls from ceiling to floor. A broken window had been covered with black trash bags taped up in a desperate patchwork, and the cold wind had to be coming through anyway. A thin mattress lay directly on rotting floorboards. No bed frame, no blankets warm enough. A tiny gas burner sat in the corner. A rusted faucet. No refrigerator, no heat. Nothing at all but extreme poverty. This is where she's lived for the past 9 months? Kieran asked, his voice trembling from the effort of holding back the rage boiling inside him. Yes, and this is where she gave birth. This is where she brought the baby back, after she nearly died from blood loss. Theo placed another photo on the desk, and this is her condition right now. The photo had been taken from a distance, but it was clear enough for Kieran to see. Amelia stepped out of the building, so thin her shoulder bones jutted under a torn, flimsy coat. Her cheeks were hollow. Her skin had the grayish pallor of someone close to death, and she was coughing so hard she doubled over. One hand braced against the wall so she wouldn't fall. She's got severe pneumonia, Theo said, his voice dropping. From living in a damp, moldy room with no heat for months, on top of a body depleted after childbirth, and no proper medical care. I spoke to a doctor I know, showed him the photo, and described the symptoms. He stopped, swallowed. The doctor says if she doesn't get treatment within a week, maybe less, she won't make it. The whiskey glass in Kieran's hand shattered. He didn't even realize how hard he'd been gripping it, until he saw blood running down his palm, shards of glass driven deep into flesh. But he didn't feel pain. He didn't feel anything except rage and guilt tearing him apart from the inside. Amelia was dying. The woman he loved was dying in a filthy room in the South Bronx while he sat here in his $1 million mansion, drinking expensive whiskey and feeling sorry for himself. Get the car ready. Kieran stood, blood dripping from his hand onto the carpet, and he didn't care. Now, do you want me to bring more men? That area isn't safe. No, I'm going alone. Kieran headed for the door, then stopped and looked back at Theo. Call Dr. Webb to the mansion. Prepare a room. Prepare medicine. Prepare everything needed to treat severe pneumonia. And make sure Liam has someone to care for him until I'm back. And if she doesn't want to go with you? Kieran didn't turn around. Then I'll persuade her, no matter what it takes. The black Escalade stopped in front of the building, and Kieran sat motionless in the car for a moment, staring through the window at the place Amelia had called home for 9 months. The 6-story building leaned like it might collapse. Cracked brick walls smeared with graffiti and stains of unknown origin. Broken windows patched with rotting boards or black plastic bags. The exterior fire escape was so rusted it looked like it would snap if anyone dared step on it. This was the South Bronx, Mott Haven, where even the police hesitated to come after dark. And this was where she'd lived, where she'd carried a child, where she'd given birth, where she'd nearly died. Kieran stepped out of the car, his $15,000 black Armani suit standing out in a grotesque way against the ruined scene. A few men on the street corner watched him with measuring eyes. but something in the way he walked, in the ice-cold stare he wore, made them look away without a word. Predators recognized predators, and Kieran Corsini sat at the top of the food chain. He entered the building and the stench hit him in the face like a fist. Urine, rotting trash, mold, something decaying that he didn't want to know the name of. The hallway was pitch black, with only a single bulb still working at the far end, flickering like it was dying. The floor felt slick under the soles of his leather shoes. The staircase began at the corner of the corridor. No elevator because this building had never had one. Kieran stepped onto the first stair and the wood creaked beneath him, so rotten he could feel it sag. He kept climbing. 1 floor, 2 floors, 3 floors. Every step was an accusation echoing in his head. She'd climbed these stairs every day, with a belly that kept growing, with swollen feet from pregnancy, with a body drained from working 12 hours a day just to afford the rent on this rotting room. 4th floor. 5th floor. Kieran stopped at the end of the 5th floor hallway, in front of a cracked wooden door with the number 507 hanging crooked on a rusted nail, and he heard it, coughing. Coughing that sounded like it ripped straight through flesh, coming from behind the door, wet and heavy, the cough of someone who didn't have the strength to cough anymore but had to because the lungs wouldn't allow anything else. The cough went on, broke, then went on again, as if the person inside was trying to breathe and couldn't. Kieran stood there, hand raised to knock, frozen in midair. He was Kieran Corsini, the Mafia boss who made the entire east coast of the United States tremble. He'd ordered killings without blinking. He'd watched enemies die by his hand without a moment of hesitation. He'd run a criminal empire with iron and blood for 8 years. But now, standing in front of this rotten door, listening to the cough of the woman he'd abandoned, Kieran didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry. Was there any apology large enough for the 9 months of hell she'd endured? I came to bring you home. Why would she have any reason to believe him after everything that had happened? I love you." What right did he have to say that when he hadn't protected her? The coughing inside stopped, replaced by harsh, labored wheezing. Kieran lowered his hand, drew a deep breath, then knocked. No answer. Only heavy silence and that struggling breath coming from inside. He knocked again, harder. Still no answer. And Kieran knew he couldn't stand here waiting any longer. Not when she was dying on the other side of this door. Kieran didn't wait. He grabbed the doorknob, twisted hard, and the old, ruined lock popped loose with a single shove. The door swung open and he stepped inside, then froze, as if someone had punched him straight in the chest. The room was worse than the photo. Much worse. The stink of mold and damp was so thick it was hard to breathe. The walls were blotched with black mildew from floor to ceiling, spreading like dead fingers crawling toward the center of the room. The only window was half shattered, patched with black trash bags taped up in place, but the cold still seeped through, snapping the plastic in the night wind. There was no heat, no warmth, only the skin-slicing cold of a New York winter night, and a thin mattress laid directly on wet, rotting floorboards. And on that mattress was Amelia, curled in on herself, wrapped in every scrap of fabric she owned, from a thin blanket to an old coat to something that looked like a curtain somebody had thrown away. But even all of it together wasn't enough, because she was still shaking in waves, shaking without control. Kieran moved closer, and the pain in his chest doubled. Amelia from 9 months ago, the girl with luminous olive skin, with healthy color in her cheeks, with that warm smile every morning when she brought coffee to his room, was almost unrecognizable now. Her cheeks were hollow, her cheekbones sharp under gray, ashen skin. Her lips were cracked, so dry they flaked, a smear of dried blood at the corner. Her eyes sat deep in their sockets. Bruised dark circles pooled around them. She was so thin Kieran could see her collarbones rising beneath her shirt, her wrists narrow as if they might snap. But when she opened her eyes and saw him, those amber eyes still burned, not the weak flame of someone about to die, but the fire of anger, of pride, of a woman shoved into hell who refused to kneel. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was rough, weak, but cold as steel. No surprise, no fear, no relief at seeing someone come to save her. Only the chilled fury of someone who'd learned not to expect anything from anyone. "I'm taking you home," Kieran said, trying to keep his voice steady while everything inside him fell apart. Amelia laughed, or tried to, but it turned into coughing, violent coughing, coughing until she doubled over, coughing until she clutched her chest like it was about to split open. And when she pulled her hand away, Kieran saw blood, bright red drops speckling her palm, staining the old rag she used to cover her mouth. "I don't need your pity," she said when the coughing eased, her voice still as cold as ever, even though her breath had turned into a terrifying wheeze. "You're dying." Kieran dropped to his knees beside the mattress, close enough to see her face clearly but not touching her, because he knew she wouldn't allow it. "You need a doctor. You need medicine. You need to get out of this hell. I don't need anything from you." Amelia held his gaze without blinking, without hesitation. "You think you can disappear for 9 months and then show up like some hero. You think you can come here in an expensive suit and a few promises and everything's going to be fine." "I didn't know," Kieran said, and his voice broke in a way he couldn't control. "You've got to believe me. I didn't know what happened to you. Gianna hid everything. She told me you left on your own, that you took the money and disappeared, that you didn't want anything to do with the family anymore. And you believed her." Not a question, a statement, cold and bitter. "You believed her without asking me a single word. You believed her without even looking for me to confirm it. You believed her because believing was easier, wasn't it? Easier than admitting you'd loved a maid. Easier than facing the truth that the great Mafia boss Kieran Corsini had been left behind." Every word hit like a blade, and Kieran could do nothing but take it, because she was right down to every last syllable. "You're right," he admitted, his voice dropping. "I was a coward. I believed because believing was easier. I didn't look for you because I was afraid to face the truth. That's on me. All of it is on me." "On you," Amelia repeated it, a bitter laugh tangled with another cough. "On you. Do you have any idea what I went through? Do you have any idea your sister threw money in my face, called me a whore in front of everyone, had me dragged out through the gate like a stray dog? Do you have any idea how I lived for 9 months? Digging through trash cans for food, sleeping on a freezing floor, giving birth alone in this room, biting a pillow so I wouldn't scream because I was scared the neighbors would call the police and I'd get arrested for being undocumented." She paused, breathing hard, the urge to cough rising again, but she swallowed it down, her eyes never leaving his. "And where were you? In your $1 million mansion, sleeping in a soft bed, eating like a king, thinking I walked away because I didn't want you." "Amelia." "No." She cut him off, her voice shaking but hard as steel. "You don't get to say my name like you've got the right. You lost that right a long time ago." Heavy silence fell over the room. Cold wind pushed through the gaps in the plastic covering the window, carrying a few snowflakes inside. Kieran stayed on his knees in front of the woman he loved, the woman he'd betrayed, and he didn't know what to say. Because there were no words big enough, no apology large enough, no explanation strong enough to erase the 9 months of hell she'd survived. She was right. He hadn't asked. He hadn't searched. He'd accepted the lie because it was easier than facing the truth, and she'd paid for his cowardice with everything she had. Amelia watched him kneeling there, in a suit that cost more than her rent for a year, and she decided to tell him, not so he'd pity her, not so he'd feel guilty, but so he'd understand why she couldn't trust him, couldn't trust anyone, couldn't trust anything anymore. "You want to know what I went through?" she asked, her voice rough but strangely calm. "Then I'll tell you. Every detail. So you can carry it back to your $1 million mansion and think about it every night before you fall asleep." Kieran didn't say a word. He only looked at her with eyes full of pain, and Amelia began. "That day, I was called up to your sister's office. I didn't know why. I thought maybe it was about work, maybe about the schedule, maybe about anything except what happened." She paused and drew a difficult breath. "When I walked in, your sister was sitting behind her desk, and there was an envelope on the desk. She didn't invite me to sit. She just looked at me the way you look at a roach crawling into your living room. Then she threw the envelope at me." Amelia remembered the feeling perfectly, the bills fluttering all around her, falling to the floor, landing on her shoulders, slapping her face. $5,000. She threw $5,000 in my face and said, "That's your pay for the nights you lay on your back for my brother, you Puerto Rican whore. Now get out of here before I have you dragged out." Kieran clenched his fists until his knuckles went white, but he still didn't speak. "I tried to explain. I said I didn't want the money. I said I only wanted to talk to you. Just 5 minutes, just to explain. I begged. I got on my knees and begged." Her voice trembled as she remembered, the humiliation heavier on her shoulders than the cold of this room. "And your sister laughed. She laughed and said, "My brother's in Italy handling important business. He doesn't have time for a maid's drama." Then she called security. Amelia coughed, but this time she forced it back, determined to finish. They dragged me outside, in front of the entire staff, everyone I'd worked with for 2 years. They stood there watching me get hauled away like a stray dog, and nobody said a word. Nobody helped me. "Frank," Kieran started. "Frank wasn't there then," Amelia cut in. "He came when I'd already been shoved out through the gate. He was the only one who looked at me with even a trace of pity. But he didn't do anything either. Because he couldn't. Because nobody dared go against your sister." She paused, her gaze lifting to the mold-stained ceiling as if she was searching for something she'd lost a long time ago. "After that day, everything collapsed. My work visa was canceled after only a week. I didn't know how, but now I do. Your family lawyer, wasn't it?" Kieran nodded, the pain plain on his face. "That's right. Without a visa, I became undocumented overnight. Nobody would rent to me because I didn't have papers. Nobody would hire me officially because I didn't have a valid social security number anymore. I was pushed into the street with the clothes on my back and a small bag holding the few things I managed to grab." Amelia's breathing was harsh, her lungs aching with every inhale. But she didn't stop. "I slept in shelters the first nights. Then I found this room, where nobody asks for papers because nobody here has papers. I did every job there was just to survive. Washing dishes 12 hours a day for $4 an hour in cash, cleaning hotel rooms on night shifts, picking up discarded vegetables at the market to cook, standing in line at the food bank every week to get canned food and expired bread." She laid a hand over her stomach, even though it was flat again now after giving birth. "And the whole time, I carried your child inside me. My belly grew bigger and bigger, and I still had to climb 5 flights of stairs every day. My feet swelled. My back hurt so badly I couldn't sleep. But I still had to work because if I didn't, I couldn't pay for this room, and I'd give birth on the street." Kieran had bowed his head, his shoulders shaking, but Amelia didn't soften. "Then the day I went into labor, I was in pain for 20 hours. 20 hours alone in this room, biting a pillow so I wouldn't scream because I was afraid a neighbor would call the police. Do you know what ICE is? Immigration. If they came, they'd take me and deport me to Puerto Rico. My baby would be born in a detention center. So I bit the pillow. I bit until my mouth bled. But I didn't scream. Tears started sliding down her cheeks, but her voice stayed calm in a way that was terrifying. When the bleeding wouldn't stop, I knew something was wrong. I held my baby, still covered in blood, and I crawled down 5 flights of stairs. I don't remember how I got to the clinic. I only remember the doctor saying I was lucky to be alive. I lost too much blood. They had to rush 2 units of blood into me." She looked back at Kieran, and he saw something in her eyes that wasn't only pain. It was something far colder. "I should have stayed in the hospital for a week. But I didn't have money, no insurance, no one. So I signed myself out early and brought my baby back here after 2 days. Back to this room with no heat in December." Silence. "And you ask why I can't trust you?" Amelia laughed, bitter laughter tangled with crying. "I thought about you every day for 9 months. Not because I loved you, because I hated you. Because every time I was hungry, I thought about the lavish dinners in your mansion. Every time I was cold, I thought about your warm bed. Every time I was in pain, I thought about you somewhere, living in luxury, not knowing and not caring." Kieran lifted his head, his eyes bloodshot, and Amelia saw tears on the cheeks of the man people swore never cried. But she didn't feel moved. She'd run out of tears for him a long time ago. "That was my 9 months," she finished, her voice cold as ice. "Now you know. You can leave." Kieran didn't stand. He didn't beg. He didn't offer flowery promises they both knew meant nothing. Instead, he met her gaze and told the truth. "You're dying." His voice was low and clear, not a trace of wavering. "You're coughing up blood. You can't get up without shaking. You're living in a room that's killing you a little more every day. If you want to die to punish me, that's your right. I deserve that. I deserve every bit of hate you've got for me." He paused and drew a breath. "But Liam needs his mother." Amelia went still. That name, the name she'd given her son, the name she'd written on that trembling note, was now being spoken by him with a tenderness she hadn't expected. "Liam is 3 weeks old. He needs his mother's milk. He needs his mother's warmth. He needs to hear his mother sing to him every night. Kieran went on, every word heavy as stone. I can hire 10 of the best nurses in America, but none of them is his mother. None of them can replace you. A heavy silence settled over the room. Amelia stared at him, searching for a lie, searching for a scheme, searching for anything that would let her refuse and shove him out of here. But she couldn't find it. There was only raw, painful truth in his gray eyes. And the image of Liam, her son, that tiny face with gray eyes like his father's, those small lips she'd kissed one last time before she set him down on freezing concrete. She'd thought she'd never see him again. She'd thought she'd die in this room and nobody would know. She'd accepted it. But now, with the chance to see her baby one more time, to hold him one more time, could she refuse? I'm not coming back to you, Amelia said at last, her voice still cold but less sharp. If I go back, I'm going back for Liam. Only for Liam, not for you. Okay? Kieran nodded immediately, without a second of hesitation. I'm not yours, Amelia continued, her eyes locked on his. I'm not in your room. I'm not playing the part of a wife or a lover or anything else. I'm Liam's mother. That's all. Okay. When I'm well again, I'll take my son and leave. You won't stop me. Kieran was silent for a second, and Amelia saw pain flash through his eyes, but he still nodded. Okay. If that's what you want when the time comes, I won't stop you. Amelia kept staring, trying to find a seat, but she still couldn't. She took a breath, her lungs burning, and delivered her final condition. If you, or your sister, or anyone in that mansion makes me feel like trash again, even once, I'll disappear. And this time you won't find me, not because I'm good at hiding, but because I'll be dead before you can. And I'll take the secret of where I hid my child with me. Her threat wasn't empty. Kieran knew it. Looking into her eyes, he saw the resolve of a woman who'd lost everything and had nothing left to fear. I understand, he said, his voice low and serious. Gianna's been thrown out of the mansion. She's not allowed back until I say so. All staff have been informed that you're the mother of my son, and you're to be treated with absolute respect. Anyone who has a problem with that can find work somewhere else. Amelia looked at him, and for the first time since he stepped into this room, she didn't see an enemy. She still didn't see someone she could trust, didn't see someone she could love again, but at least she saw a father trying to do right by his child. And for now, that was enough. Okay, she said at last, her voice exhausted to the bone. I'll go with you. For Liam. Kieran rose, slipped off his expensive suit jacket, and draped it over her shoulders without asking. Amelia wanted to refuse, wanted to throw it back, but the warmth of the cashmere was too tempting compared to the cold that had soaked into her bones for months. Can you walk? He asked, his voice tight with worry. Or do I need to? I can walk, Amelia cut in, pride intact even as her legs trembled when she forced herself upright. She nearly fell, and Kieran reached out to steady her, but stopped just inches from her body, waiting for permission. Amelia looked at his hand, then at his eyes. Then she took it and let him help her stand. Not because she forgave him, but because she needed to live. For Liam, Amelia didn't speak for the entire drive. She sat in the passenger seat, wrapped in Kieran's cashmere jacket, staring out the car window without really seeing anything. Kieran drove in silence. No music, no attempt at conversation, only the occasional glance toward her with a worry she pretended not to notice. The black Escalade slid through the dark streets of the South Bronx, crossed the bridge into Manhattan, and Amelia felt like she was moving between two different worlds. Skyscrapers blazing with light rose beyond the glass, luxury storefronts with brand names she'd only ever heard spoken, elegant restaurants where a single menu cost more than her rent for a month. She remembered she'd been here before, not as a customer, but as the one cleaning up after people like that. The office building on the corner of Fifth Avenue. She'd mopped floors there 3 nights a week for 2 months. The 5-star hotel near Central Park. She'd cleaned rooms there until she was fired for not having valid papers. This world had been right in front of her, and she'd never been allowed to step inside it. The car crossed the George Washington Bridge into New Jersey, and the scenery shifted from towers to sprawling estates behind iron fences and security cameras. Amelia's stomach tightened when she realized they were close. The Corsini mansion, the place she'd once called home, the place where she'd loved a man in the dark, the place she'd been thrown out of like a dog. The iron gate opened as the car approached, and Amelia saw the familiar drive leading up to the massive mansion. The snow had been cleared away. The lights burned bright in the night. Everything still luxurious and perfect the way it had been the day she left, as if her 9 months of hell had been nothing but a dream. The car stopped at the front entrance, and Amelia saw them. The staff lined up on both sides of the walkway. More than 24 people, from security to kitchen workers to housekeepers. Familiar faces. Faces she'd worked beside. Faces that had stood there and watched her get dragged out without a single word. Kieran opened the car door for her, and Amelia stepped down. Her legs still shaking, but her back straight, her head held high. She wasn't going to let them see her weak. Never again. She walked between the two lines of people, and she saw them. The ones who'd been there the day she was humiliated. The ones who'd sneered when Gianna threw money in her face. The ones who'd turned their heads when she begged to see Kieran. Now they bowed their heads and avoided her eyes, not daring to meet the gaze of the woman they'd once looked down on. Amelia didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her silence was heavier than anything she could have said. Then she heard hurried footsteps, a choked sob, and an older woman pushed out from the crowd. Patricia Nguyen, the housekeeper of the mansion, a 60-year-old Vietnamese woman with silver hair and eyes that had always been warm. She was the one who'd taught Amelia how to make Kieran's coffee exactly the way he liked it. She was the one who'd slipped extra food onto Amelia's plate when she thought nobody was watching. She was the only one who'd treated Amelia like a human being instead of a maid. "My girl." Patricia threw her arms around Amelia, her small frame trembling with sobs. "My girl, I was so worried. I tried to find you, but nobody would tell me where you were. I asked Miss Gianna, but she forbade me to even say your name. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't do anything. I'm sorry." Amelia stood stiff in her embrace, not sure how to respond. For 9 months she'd built walls around her heart, learned how to feel nothing, expect nothing, trust no one. But Patricia's arms were too warm, her crying too real, and the walls Amelia had built began to crack. For the first time since the night she gave birth alone in that dark room, Amelia cried. She cried in front of someone else. She let the tears fall down her cheeks, let the sob break free from her throat, let herself be weak inside the arms of the older woman holding her like a lost daughter who'd finally come home. Kieran stood a few steps away, watching, and he understood. He understood that while he and his sister had treated Amelia like trash, there were people who'd loved her. While he slept in his $1 million mansion and believed Gianna's lies, there were people who'd worried and searched for her. He didn't deserve Amelia's forgiveness, but maybe, with the help of someone like Patricia, he could try to become someone who did. Patricia let Amelia go after a long moment, wiped her tears with the back of her hand, then turned to Kieran with a look that held gratitude and reproach at the same time. But she didn't say anything. She only nodded and stepped back, letting the boss lead Amelia inside. Kieran offered his hand, not touching her, but staying close enough to catch her if she fell. Liam's upstairs, in the nursery. Just hearing her baby's name made Amelia start moving, her legs still trembling but faster, stronger, as if the strength she'd run out of had suddenly been poured back into her from somewhere deep inside. She climbed the stairs, gripping the banister so she wouldn't fall, and Kieran followed behind, keeping his distance but staying close enough to steady her if she needed it. The second-floor hallway glowed with soft light, thick carpet underfoot, everything warm and luxurious to the point of feeling unreal after 9 months in hell. But Amelia didn't see any of it, not really. Not beyond the white door at the end of the hall, painted with a little golden star, the door leading to where her son was. She stopped in front of it, and her whole body went rigid. From inside came the gentle sound of a lullaby in English, a strange woman's voice, and the small cry of a newborn, Liam's cry. Her baby was crying, and someone else was soothing him, someone who wasn't her. 3 weeks. She'd been away from him for 3 days. 3 days she'd lain in that moldy room coughing up blood, believing she'd die without seeing him one last time. 3 days her baby had been cared for by strangers, sung to by strangers, learning the voices and scents of strangers instead of his mother. Amelia stood there, her legs shaking so hard she couldn't move. She was afraid. Afraid her baby wouldn't recognize her. Afraid he'd cry when she held him. Afraid she'd lost him forever even though he was right on the other side of this door. Kieran stepped up beside her, not touching her, only standing there. "Are you ready?" Amelia didn't answer. She lifted her hand and pushed the door open. The nursery was filled with warm light from a moon-shaped night lamp. The walls were painted a soothing pale blue, decorated with hand-painted white clouds. A white oak crib sat in the center of the room, and beside it was a velvet armchair where the nurse was sitting, holding a small bundle and singing. The nurse looked up at the sound of the door, and her expression shifted from surprise to understanding when she saw Amelia in the doorway. She stood, gently laid the baby back into the crib, then lowered her head and stepped to the corner without needing to be told. Amelia walked in, one step at a time, like she was walking on broken glass. She reached the crib and looked down. Liam, her son, 3 weeks old. So tiny he looked like he could fit in her hands. Eyes closed tight, lips moving, fists curled into little knots by his cheeks. He was bigger than the last time she'd seen him. He was chubbier, his cheeks fuller, his skin healthier and pink. He'd been cared for well. But not by her. Tears spilled before Amelia could stop them. "Can I hold him?" she asked, her voice breaking. Not sure who she was asking. Maybe herself, asking whether she still had the right to hold her baby after leaving him on cold concrete in a winter night. The nurse came closer, lifted Liam gently from the crib, and placed him into Amelia's arms. Amelia pulled him to her chest, a mother's instinct guiding her hands, supporting his head, holding him close against her heart. And she cried. She cried like she'd never been allowed to cry. Tears ran down her cheeks and fell onto the blanket around him, and she didn't care. She breathed him in, the scent of his skin, milk, baby powder, something sweet and pure she'd ached for with a madness for 72 hours. "Mi amor," she whispered in Spanish, her mother's language, the language she wanted her son to grow up knowing. "Mi bebé, I'm sorry I left you." Then she switched to English, wanting him to hear both languages, wanting him to understand even though he was far too young to understand anything. I'm here now, my son. I'm not going anywhere. Not ever again." As if he recognized her voice, Liam stirred in her arms. His tiny eyes opened, gray as a sky before a storm, gray as his father's, and looked straight into Amelia's eyes. Amelia held her breath. Did he recognize her? Did he remember her? Did he know this was his mother? Then Liam lifted his hand, that tiny hand with matchstick fingers, and wrapped it around her finger. Tight, like he never wanted to let go again. Amelia sobbed, holding him closer, bending to kiss his forehead, his cheek, the tiny fingers gripping her. "You remember me," she whispered through tears. "You still remember me." At the doorway, Kieran stood still, not stepping in, not interrupting this sacred moment. His eyes burned, and he didn't try to hide it. He let the tears run down his cheeks, let himself feel every ache and every thread of joy twisting together as he watched the woman he loved hold their son. He'd lost 9 months. 9 months of not seeing Amelia pregnant. 9 months of not feeling the baby kick inside her. 9 months of not being there when his son was born. But he had now. He had this moment, and watching Amelia hold Liam, watching his son clutch his mother's finger like he couldn't bear to let go, Kieran made a vow in his heart. He would protect them. No matter the cost, he wouldn't let anyone hurt them again. Even if he had to burn the whole world to ash, even if he had to become an even worse monster, he would protect his family. 2 weeks passed like a dream Amelia still didn't dare believe was real. Dr. Catherine Webb, the Corsini family's private physician, came every day to check on her. She was a 50-year-old woman with salt and pepper hair and eyes that were sharp but warm, and she didn't ask Amelia a single question about the past. She only focused on treatment. IV antibiotics ran through Amelia's veins twice a day. Fever reducers, expectorants, multivitamins, and nourishing meals Patricia cooked with her own hands. Amelia's body began to recover. The coughing thinned out, from every few minutes to only a few times a day. Color returned to her cheeks, no longer that death gray from the day she was brought back. Her lips weren't cracked anymore. Her skin wasn't dry and rough. Her eyes weren't sunk deep into their sockets. She was still thin, still weak, but she didn't look like someone about to die anymore. Amelia spent all her time with Liam, barely leaving the nursery unless she had to. She nursed him, changed his diapers, sang him to sleep, talked to him even though she knew he was too young to understand. She made up for the 3 weeks she'd lost, made up for every moment she hadn't been beside him, by not leaving him for even a step. And she kept her distance from Kieran, exactly as she'd said she would. She didn't eat at the same table with him. She didn't speak to him unless it was necessary. She didn't look into his eyes if she could avoid it. She stayed in the nursery. He stayed in his office or his separate bedroom, and they lived like strangers under the same roof. but Amelia knew he was trying. She saw him coming home earlier every day, from 10 at night to 8, then 6. She saw him finding excuses to pass the nursery, asking the nurse about Liam's condition, standing in the doorway for a few seconds before walking away. She saw him watching her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, his gaze full of guilt and longing he didn't bother to hide. She didn't soften. She couldn't, not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't dare. Trusting once had almost killed her. She wasn't sure she could survive trusting a second time and being betrayed again. Then one night, around 2 in the morning, when the whole mansion had sunk into silence, Liam woke up crying. Amelia lifted him and walked back and forth in the room, singing softly in Spanish. The song her mother used to sing to her when she was little in Puerto Rico, before she died of cancer, before Amelia became an orphan. Amelia's voice was gentle and sad, carrying the ache of her homeland, of her mother, of a time when she'd been loved without conditions. She sang to Liam, but she also sang to herself, to the 14-year-old girl who lost her mother, to the 20-year-old girl who came to America alone with a dream of a better life, to the 27-year-old woman who'd lost everything and was trying to build again from ashes. She didn't know Kieran was standing in the doorway. Or maybe she did. Maybe she heard his footsteps stop out in the hall, heard the soft sound of his breathing in the quiet night. But she didn't stop. She sang until the last note, until Liam fell asleep in her arms again, until she laid him in the crib and tucked the blanket around him. Then she turned, and he was still there, at the threshold, not coming in, not walking away, only watching her with eyes she couldn't read. They looked at each other in silence for a long time. Then Kieran gave a small nod, turned, and walked away without a word. Amelia watched until his shadow disappeared around the corner of the hallway. She didn't chase him off. She didn't shout for him to stay away. She let him hear her sing. Let him see her soothe their child. Let him have one small moment inside the life she and Liam had. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't love. But it was the first step, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. While Amelia healed inside the mansion, the outside world didn't stop turning, and Kieran Corsini's world was the underworld, where rumors spread faster than fire, and weakness was a death sentence. The meeting took place in the basement room, a place with no windows, no cameras, no electronic devices that could be tapped. Kieran sat at the head of the table. Theo Brennan stood beside him with a thick file in his hands, and the 3 most trusted capos of the Corsini family sat around them with tight, uneasy faces. "The Volkov family is moving," Theo began, his voice low and grave. "Viktor Volkov has had people sniffing around you for 2 weeks. They've been asking about the mansion, about your schedule, about staff." Kieran didn't speak. He only signaled Theo to continue. "The rumor's already out in the underworld. They know you've got a son. They know the child is being kept in the mansion." One of the capos, a silver-haired man named Salvatore, swore in Italian. "How do they know? Who leaked it?" "Nobody on our side," Theo said with a shake of his head. "It could have come from the hospital, or the charity clinic where she gave birth, or anyone who saw her pregnant and guessed the rest." Kieran clenched his hand under the table until his knuckles went white. The charity clinic, the place Amelia nearly died giving birth, the place she'd been forced to sign herself out early because she didn't have money. The past was coming back to haunt him in ways he'd never expected. "What else?" he asked, his voice cold as ice. Theo hesitated for a second before he answered. "They're digging into her, into Amelia. Her name, her background, her connection to you. And that means they're looking for my weakness," Kieran finished, his voice stripped of feeling. "Yes," Theo nodded. "Viktor Volkov lost his younger brother in the war with us 2 years ago. He's been waiting for a chance to take revenge, and now he thinks he's found the way." Heavy silence filled the room. Every man there understood what it meant. War. Not a war over territory or power, but a personal war. The most dangerous kind in the underworld because no rules were respected. "Increase security," Kieran ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. 24/7 protection on the nursery. 2 men on the door, 2 men patrolling the hallway, cameras on every corner. Nobody goes into that room except the people I personally authorize. "And her?" Salvatore asked. "Amelia, does she know?" Kieran was silent for a moment before he answered. "No. She's only just started to recover. She doesn't need more fear. But if she doesn't know, she won't be cautious." "That's my job," Kieran cut in. "My job is to protect her. Your job is to make sure not a single Volkov man gets anywhere near this mansion." The meeting ended, the capos left with lists of orders, and Kieran stayed behind alone in the windowless room. He thought of Amelia, upstairs with Liam, unaware that his world was threatening to swallow her again. He thought of his son, tiny and innocent, unaware that his father was a mafia boss, and that it meant enemies would exist before he could even walk. 9 months ago, Kieran hadn't protected Amelia because he hadn't known. But this time was different. This time he knew the threat was coming. This time he had a chance. And this time, he wasn't going to fail. Even if he had to wipe out the entire Volkov family, even if he had to burn the whole underworld to ash, he would protect his family. While the world remained unaware, Kieran began a calculated strike against the Volkovs, ensuring their shadows would never darken his doorstep again. A month passed, and things began to change. Slowly, like ice melting under spring sunlight. Amelia stopped locking herself inside the nursery. She started coming downstairs to eat with the staff in the kitchen, sitting beside Patricia and the people who'd been kind to her before. Then one evening, she showed up in the main dining room at dinner time, where Kieran usually ate alone. She didn't sit next to him. She chose a chair at the far end of the long 12-seat table, nearly 4 meters away from him, but it was still the same room, the same meal, and that alone was a massive step forward. Kieran didn't say anything. He only gave a small nod of greeting when she walked in, then kept eating as if this was the most normal thing in the world. But Amelia saw the corner of his mouth lift just slightly, saw his shoulders ease, saw him slow down as if he wanted to stretch the meal out for a few more minutes. In the dinners that followed, they began to talk. Not deep conversations, just small things about Liam. "He's starting to smile," Amelia said one night, her voice still guarded but no longer icy. "This morning he smiled when I sang to him." "I know," Kieran answered, then quickly explained when he saw her frown. "The nurse reports to me. About his health. I'm not watching you." Amelia looked at him for a moment, then nodded, accepting the explanation without pushing further. In the days after that, the conversations grew a little longer. About how Liam liked to be held. About how he hated loud noises. About how he had a habit of gripping his mother's hair whenever he nursed. Conversations between two strangers, learning how to be parents together, nothing more and nothing less. Then one night, around 10, after Liam was asleep and Amelia was sitting in the living room reading, Kieran walked in. He looked like he was about to apologize and leave when he saw her there, but Amelia didn't send him away. She only watched him for a moment, then returned to her book. Kieran sat on the opposite sofa, picked up a work file he probably meant to read, and they sat in silence. Silence that wasn't comfortable, but wasn't tense either. Just two people sharing the same space without needing to speak. Then Amelia lifted her head, and her eyes landed on the scar along the left side of his jaw, faint but still visible under the warm lamplight. She'd seen it before, many times, but she'd never asked. "That scar?" she said suddenly, and even she didn't know why she asked. "Where did it come from?" Kieran raised a hand to touch it, as if he'd forgotten it was there. "The day my father was assassinated," he answered, his voice low and distant. 8 years ago. I was 28. Amelia didn't speak, just waited, and Kieran continued as if he needed to say it. Needed someone to know. "We were at a restaurant, having dinner for my father's birthday. The Benedetti family sent an assassin. They shot my father first, then turned on me." He paused, eyes fixed on nothing, like he was seeing it all again. "Gianna shoved me aside. The bullet meant for my heart hit her instead. She was in the hospital for 6 months, nearly paralyzed on one side." "So you let her control you," Amelia said. "Not a question, a statement." "So I couldn't say no to her for 8 years, Kieran admitted, bitterness thick in his voice. "Every time I wanted to push back on something, I saw the scar on her back. I saw the way she still limps sometimes when the weather turns cold. And I stayed quiet. I let her decide everything because I owed her my life." He looked straight into Amelia's eyes. "Until she did the unforgivable thing. Until she threw you into the street with my child in your belly." Silence settled over the room. Amelia looked at him, and for the first time since she'd come back, she didn't only see the man who'd betrayed her. She saw a man who'd lost his father at 28, who'd carried a debt to his sister for 8 years, torn between gratitude and the need to live his own life. She didn't forgive him. She still couldn't. But for the first time, she understood. 8 years, she said at last, her voice softer than before. That's a long time to live in someone else's shadow. Kieran didn't answer. He only watched her with eyes full of things he couldn't say out loud. And Amelia went back to her book. But she didn't tell him to leave. They sat in silence until late, two strangers slowly finding their way back toward each other. 2 months after Amelia came back, the storm she'd been waiting for finally broke. That afternoon, Amelia was sitting in the living room with Liam in her arms, reading him a picture book Patricia had bought. Liam was nearly 3 months old now, already smiling, already cooing back when he heard his mother's voice, staring at the bright drawings on the page with curious gray eyes. Patricia sat nearby, knitting, and every so often she looked up and smiled at the sight of mother and son. Everything was peaceful, until the sharp click of high heels against marble echoed down the hallway, and Gianna Corsini walked into the living room like she still owned the place. Amelia went rigid at the sight of her. Gianna was 40, still elegant and razor-sharp the way she'd been the day she threw money in Amelia's face. Black hair smoothed into place. Expensive Chanel, eyes cold as steel sweeping the room before landing on Amelia and the baby in her arms. "The whore is still here," Gianna said, her voice sweet in the most dangerous way. "I thought my brother would come to his senses after 2 months, but it looks like you've sunk your claws in deeper than I expected." Amelia felt her heart speed up, felt that familiar fear crawl up her spine the way it had 9 months ago. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She wasn't the trembling maid begging for 5 minutes with Kieran. She was Liam's mother. She'd survived hell, and she wasn't going to let anyone humiliate her in front of her son. She turned to Patricia and gently placed Liam into the housekeeper's arms. "Take him up to the nursery for me," she said, her voice strangely calm. "It looks like I've got a visitor to deal with." Patricia hesitated, eyes flicking from Amelia to Gianna with worry, but Amelia nodded to reassure her. "I'm fine. Take him." When Patricia carried Liam out of the room, Amelia turned back to face Gianna. She stood straight, no slouching, no bowed head, looking directly at the woman who'd once been her worst nightmare. "My name is Amelia Santos," she said, clear and steady. "I'm Liam Corsini's mother, and you don't get to insult me in my son's home." Gianna laughed, a cold sound that echoed in the wide room. "Your son's home? This is the Corsini family's home. This is the house our ancestors built over 3 generations. You're nothing but a Puerto Rican slut who got lucky with a womb that works." "I heard your insults 9 months ago," Amelia said, refusing to back down even as her heart hammered. "I've got no intention of hearing them again. You should leave before Kieran knows you're here." "Kieran?" Gianna took a step closer, her eyes bright with anger. "Who do you think you are, saying my brother's name like you've got the right? You think having his kid means you can step into this family?" "I heard. He's doing the paperwork for you. He's filing to recognize the child officially. He's planning to present you in public like you're something worth showing." So the rumors had reached Gianna. Amelia wasn't surprised. "That's his decision," she said, deliberately using he instead of sir the way she used to. "Not yours." "His decision?" Gianna shouted, losing control. "He's destroying everything. Destroying the family, destroying the name, destroying everything our father built, all for a whore and a half-breed." Half-breed. Amelia felt blood rush into her face, felt anger explode even harder than fear. She could endure being called a whore, being insulted, being despised, but nobody got to speak about her son like that. "Get out," Amelia said, her voice shaking with rage, not fear. "Right now. You dare throw me out?" Gianna stepped so close Amelia could smell her expensive perfume. "Who are you to throw me out? I'm Liam's mother, and you don't belong in this house after you called my son a half-breed." Gianna slapped her. A diamond ring flashed as her hand struck Amelia's cheek, with the force of 8 years of control being challenged, pride being wounded, hatred piling up over time. Amelia staggered, her face burning, blood in her mouth. But she didn't fall. She stayed upright, lifted her head, and looked Gianna straight in the eyes. Then she slapped her back, harder. No diamond ring, but 9 months of hell, nights of hunger and cold, 20 hours of labor alone, every ounce of hatred and pain she'd carried because of this woman. Gianna reeled, eyes wide with shock, a hand pressed to her cheek. She hadn't expected Amelia to fight back. Nobody fought back against Gianna Corsini. "The next time you touch me," Amelia said, her voice cold as ice, "I won't just slap you back." Footsteps sounded in the hallway, fast and decisive, and Kieran appeared in the living room doorway with a face cold as stone. He'd seen everything on the security cameras. From the moment Gianna walked in, to the slap and the slap back. He'd sprinted down from his office the instant he saw his sister lift her hand. But Amelia hadn't needed him to protect her. She'd protected herself. Kieran. Gianna turned to her brother. One hand still pressed to the cheek Amelia had just reddened. You're right on time. This whore just attacked me. Call security and throw her out right now. Kieran stepped into the room, but instead of going to Gianna, he placed himself between her and Amelia, like a wall. What are you doing here? His voice was so cold, even Amelia felt a shiver. I banned you from setting foot in this mansion. Banned me? Gianna laughed, but there was panic threaded through it. You can't ban me. I'm your sister. I raised you after Mother died. I saved your life. And I let you control my life for 8 years because of that, Kieran said, his tone steady as steel. 8 years I didn't dare say no. 8 years I let you decide everything, from business to my private life. 8 years I carried the debt of the bullet you took for me. He stepped closer to Gianna, and she backed up, fear flickering in her eyes for the first time. But you don't get to decide who I'm allowed to love. You don't get to throw my child's mother into the street. You don't get to call my son a half-breed. Kieran, you're under her spell. Gianna tried to regain control, her voice shifting into pleading. Can't you see? She's just a maid who wants money. She wants to use the baby to cling to you, to the Corsini fortune. I did everything for you, for the family's honor, for the pure Italian blood our father. Don't mention our father. Kieran cut her off, his voice sharp as a blade. Father would be ashamed of what you've done. He didn't teach us to treat people like trash. He didn't teach us to throw a pregnant woman into the street in the middle of winter. He also didn't teach you to sleep with a maid. Gianna screamed, fully losing control. He didn't teach you to shame the Corsini name by having a child with a penniless Puerto Rican girl. Heavy silence fell across the room. Kieran stood there, staring at his sister like she was a stranger. So this is what you really think, he said, his voice more sad than angry. For 8 years I thought you were protecting me out of love. Turns out you only wanted control. You wanted me as your puppet, marrying who you chose, living the life you mapped out. I wanted what's best for you. No, Kieran said with a slow shake of his head. You wanted what's best for you. You were afraid if I had my own family, I wouldn't need you anymore. You were afraid of losing power, losing influence, losing your position in this family. So you threw Amelia out. You killed every relationship I had. You kept me beside you like property. Gianna went still, and Amelia saw something collapse in that woman's eyes. Not remorse, not awareness of wrongdoing, the fury of someone being stripped bare. Fine, Gianna said, her voice trembling but hard as steel. You want to choose her over me? Then choose. But here's my ultimatum. Either she disappears from here, or you lose me forever. I'll never accept her as part of this family. Kieran didn't hesitate, didn't think, didn't pause for even a second. I lost you a long time ago, Gianna. The moment you decided an innocent child didn't deserve to live. The moment you threw a pregnant woman into the street in winter. The moment you destroyed the life of the woman I love just because she wasn't born into money. He stepped aside and opened a path for Gianna to leave. The door's right there. You know the way out. Gianna stood frozen for a moment, eyes bloodshot, mouth tight. Then she turned and walked out with heavy steps, and this time she didn't look back. Her heels faded, a door slammed, an engine started, tires rolled away from the mansion, then silence. Kieran stayed there a moment longer, his shoulders sinking slightly as if he'd finally dropped a weight he'd carried for 8 years. Then he turned to Amelia, and for the first time since she'd come back, she saw he wasn't hiding anything. Pain, relief, and something that looked like hope. Are you okay? He asked softly. Amelia looked at him, the man who'd just chosen her over his own sister, the man who'd just cut off an 8-year bond for her and their son. She still hadn't forgiven him completely. She still wasn't ready to love again. But for the first time, she nodded without looking away. I'm okay. That night, when the entire mansion had fallen into silence, and Liam was sleeping deeply in his crib, Amelia stood outside the door of Kieran's office. She didn't know why she'd come. She only knew that after what happened this afternoon, she couldn't sleep. She knocked softly, and his voice came from inside. Come in. Kieran sat behind his desk, a whiskey glass half empty in front of him, the desk lamp casting light over his exhausted face. He didn't look surprised to see her. He only set the glass down and waited. Amelia stepped in, closed the door behind her, then stood there for a moment before she spoke. "Why did you do that?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. "She's your only family." 8 years. You said for 8 years you didn't dare say no to her. And today. Today I did say no, Kieran finished for her, his voice low and tired, because I finally had a reason strong enough to say no. What reason? Kieran looked straight into her eyes without hesitation. You. Liam. My family. Amelia felt her heart start beating faster. She's your family too. Gianna is my sister, Kieran said. But you're my son's mother. Liam is my son. And if I have to choose between the person who nearly killed you and the person I want to protect for the rest of my life, I'll choose you. Every time. Without thinking, silence filled the room. Amelia stood there, not knowing how to react to the honesty in his voice, to the way he didn't hide anything in his eyes. Then she did something that surprised even her. She walked to the chair beside his desk and sat down, closer to him than she'd been at any point since she came back. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said truthfully, her voice trembling a little. "There were nights I lay in that room, coughing up blood, thinking I'd die alone and nobody would know. I hated you on those nights. I hated you so much that if I could, I'd want you to feel a piece of my pain." "I know," Kieran said, guilt heavy in his voice. "And you've got the right to hate me. You've got the right to never forgive. I don't deserve forgiveness." "Then what do you want?" Amelia asked, meeting his gaze. "If you know I might never forgive you, why are you still trying?" "Because you don't need to forgive," Kieran said, leaning toward her, sincere. "You only need to give me the chance to prove I can change, to prove I'm not the coward who believed my sister's lie, instead of looking for you, to prove I can be the man you and Liam deserve." The silence stretched. Amelia looked down at her hands, fingers intertwined in her lap. "I used to love you," she whispered, so softly he had to lean in to hear her. "Before everything happened, before I was thrown out, before I learned what betrayal felt like. I loved you so much I thought I'd do anything for you." "And now?" Kieran asked, his voice unsteady like he was afraid of the answer. Amelia lifted her head and looked at him with eyes full of emotions she couldn't name. "Now I don't know. I don't know what's left underneath all this anger. Maybe there's nothing. Maybe it's ashes. Maybe." She didn't finish, but Kieran understood. Maybe there was still something. He reached for her hand, slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But she didn't. He touched her hand, gently, for the first time since she came back. Her skin was warm under his fingers, and Kieran felt like he'd just been given something priceless. "Let me help you find out," he said, his voice like a vow. "Let me prove that under all that anger, there's still something worth saving. And if there's nothing left, I'll spend my whole life building it again from the ground up." Amelia didn't answer, but she didn't pull her hand away either. And in that quiet room, with his warm hand resting on hers, for the first time since she'd stepped into hell 9 months ago, Amelia allowed herself to hope. A few days passed after that night in the office, and everything between them had shifted in a way so subtle they both felt it more than they could name it. There was no more 4-meter distance at the dinner table, no more stolen glances, no more heavy silence when they happened to be in the same room. They talked more, about Liam, about small things, about the past before everything fell apart. And tonight, with Liam asleep and the mansion quiet, Amelia stood alone on the 3rd-floor balcony, looking out at the Manhattan skyline glittering in the distance. The night air was cool, but it didn't cut into skin the way those winter nights had. Spring was coming, carrying the first warm breath after a long, brutal season. She heard familiar footsteps behind her, and Kieran came to stand beside her, saying nothing, only looking out in the same direction. They stood in silence for a long time, shoulders nearly touching, breaths blending into the night. Then Amelia spoke, her voice light as wind. "When I thought I was going to die," she said, eyes still fixed on the far horizon, "I didn't think about hate." Kieran turned to look at her, but she kept going as if she was speaking to herself. "I thought about the nights we talked until morning. In the kitchen, when the whole mansion was asleep. You told me about work, about pressure, about the nights you couldn't sleep. I told you about Puerto Rico, about my mother, about my small dreams. We talked like there were no borders between boss and maid." She paused and drew a deep breath. "I thought about your smile. Not the smile you showed the world, the cold, calculating one. The smile you had when you thought nobody was watching, when you found something funny in a book, when you saw the first flower bloom in the garden, when you looked at me and thought I didn't notice. You noticed, Kieran said, his voice rough. I always noticed. Amelia turned to look at him for the first time since he stepped onto the balcony. I hated you for 9 months. I hated you so much it was the only thing that kept me alive. I told myself I had to live to hate you, so one day you'd know what I endured. But when I lay there in that dark room, coughing up blood and thinking tonight might be my last night, the hate didn't come. She stopped, tears glinting at the corners of her eyes. Only the good memories. Only you. Silence settled over them, broken only by the wind and the distant hum of a city that never slept. I don't want to hate you anymore, Amelia said at last, her voice tired but relieved. It's too exhausting. Carrying hate is like carrying a stone on your shoulder every day. I'm tired. I want to put it down. Kieran lifted his hand and touched her cheek, his thumb catching the tear as it slid down. Amelia didn't flinch away. She looked into his eyes and saw everything there. Guilt, regret, hope, and love. The love he'd buried for so long because he was afraid to admit it. Kieran leaned in, slowly, giving her time to step back if she wanted. He stopped a few centimeters from her lips, warm breath brushing her skin, and waited. She could refuse. She had every right to refuse. He would accept whatever she decided. But Amelia didn't refuse. She lifted her hand, caught the collar of his shirt, and pulled him down. Their mouths met, and the world seemed to stop turning. The kiss tasted of salt from her tears and maybe his. It tasted of the bitterness of the past, of nights she'd been alone and days he'd drowned in regret. But it also tasted of hope, of spring arriving, of a second chance neither of them had dared dream of. When they finally pulled apart, forehead to forehead, breath mingling, Amelia opened her eyes and looked at him. This isn't forgiveness, she said, a whisper but clear. I'm not ready to forgive. It might take time. It might take a long time. I know, Kieran said, his fingers brushing her cheek. This is starting over, Amelia said, from the beginning, slowly. No promises except trying. Kieran smiled, the smile she'd thought about in her darkest nights. The smile meant only for her. Starting over, he repeated like an oath. I won't waste this chance. 4 months passed like a dream Amelia finally allowed herself to believe was real. Liam, now 7 months old and thriving, was practicing crawling all over the living room with astonishing determination, his gray eyes sparkling every time he saw his mother or father step into the room. He'd learned how to laugh out loud, how to babble sounds that came close to Mama and Dada, how to clap when he was happy, and how to scream when he wasn't held long enough. He was the joy of the entire mansion, loved by every staff member, but nobody loved him like Patricia did, the woman who'd declared herself his unofficial grandmother and spent every spare moment playing with him, singing to him, and slipping extra snacks into Amelia's cabinet, as if Amelia was still the skinny girl from before, who needed to be fattened up. Amelia had fully recovered. The cough was long gone. Her cheeks were rosy, her body strong, her eyes bright in a way Kieran couldn't stop looking at. Her green card had been approved after 4 months of work with the best legal team money could buy, and Amelia no longer lived with the fear of deportation. She'd started taking online business management classes, chasing the dream she used to tell Kieran about on those nights when they talked until morning. The dream of opening a small bakery, a place where she could make the pastries her mother taught her, Puerto Rican recipes passed down from one generation to the next. Kieran didn't just encourage her, he offered to invest, but Amelia refused. She wanted to build it with her own strength, and he respected that. The threat from the Volkov family had been handled quietly, in a way Kieran never told Amelia about, and Amelia never asked about. She knew who he was. She knew what his world was. But he'd kept his promise not to let that darkness touch her and Liam. Viktor Volkov wasn't a threat anymore, and that was all she needed to know. One morning, Kieran handed her an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, in Gianna's handwriting. I need time. I still don't fully understand, but I don't want to lose you forever. When I'm ready, I'll reach out. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't acceptance, but it was a door left slightly open. Kieran watched Amelia after she finished reading, waiting for her reaction. She's your sister, Amelia said, handing the letter back to him. If one day she wants to come back, that's your decision. I won't stand in the middle. Kieran took the letter, but didn't open it again. Gianna can come back when she learns how to respect you and Liam. Not before. Amelia smiled, and Kieran realized it was the smile he'd loved for a long time, the warm, real smile she used to give him before everything fell apart. They weren't perfect. The past hadn't vanished. But they were rebuilding, day by day, moment by moment, and that was enough. That morning began like every other morning over the past 6 months. Sunlight poured through the dining room windows, and Liam sat in his high chair with oatmeal smeared all over his face, while Amelia patiently fed him spoonful after spoonful. He was 7 months old, gray eyes sparkling like his father's, a bright smile like his mother's, and a stubborn streak inherited from both of them. Kieran walked into the dining room, but instead of taking his usual seat at the head of the table, he pulled out a chair and sat beside Amelia and Liam. Amelia lifted her head and looked at him, a little surprised because he usually left early on weekdays, but she didn't say anything, only kept feeding the baby. Kieran said, his voice rougher than usual. Amelia set the spoon down and turned to him, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Worry, nervousness, and a hint of fear. A strange thing on the face of the man who made the entire east coast of America tremble. "I'm not perfect," he began, speaking slowly like he'd rehearsed these words 100 times in his mind. "I've got enemies who want me dead every day. My work is dangerous in ways most people can't imagine. My past is full of blood and choices I'm not proud of. I failed you once, failed you so badly I nearly lost you forever." Amelia opened her mouth to speak, but Kieran lifted a hand, asking her to let him finish. "I know I don't deserve you. I know there are millions of men better than me out there. Men who don't carry the weight of the underworld. Men who could give you a normal, safe life. I know you deserve more than what I can offer. Kieran, but I love you," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I love you in a way I've never loved anyone. I love the way you look at Liam with eyes full of love. I love the way you smile when you think nobody's watching. I love the way you forgave me even though I didn't deserve it. The way you gave me a second chance, even though I destroyed the first one completely." He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small black velvet box, and opened it. Inside was a simple ring. Not a large, showy diamond the way people would expect from a Mafia boss, but a small amber stone set in a white gold band. Amber. The color of her eyes. "Amelia Santos," Kieran said, his voice serious and full of love. "Will you give me the chance to spend the rest of my life making it right? Will you give me the honor of calling you my wife? Of waking up beside you every morning? Of raising Liam with you and maybe having more children someday? Will you give me a lifetime to prove I can become the man you deserve?" Silence settled over the dining room. Liam looked from his mother to his father, as if he was waiting for the answer too. Then Amelia smiled. A real smile. The brightest smile Kieran had ever seen. The smile he'd thought he'd never see again after everything that happened. "Yes," she said, tears shining at the corners of her eyes but her smile never fading. "But I've got one condition. Anything. If you disappoint me again, if you let anyone treat me like trash again, I won't just leave," she said, tilting her head, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "I'll take over your Mafia empire myself and throw you out into the street. Do you understand?" Kieran burst into laughter. Real laughter, free and happy, fair deal. He slid the ring onto her finger, then leaned down and kissed her, right in front of Liam, who clapped and babbled happily like he understood something wonderful had just happened. And in that moment, in a dining room filled with sunlight and their 7-month-old son laughing in his high chair, Amelia realized happiness wasn't perfection. Happiness was finding someone willing to change for you. It was giving a second chance even after you'd been hurt. It was rebuilding from ashes with the faith that this time would be different. They weren't perfect. Kieran was still a Mafia boss with enemies everywhere. Amelia still carried the scars of 9 months in hell. The past didn't disappear just because they'd chosen to forgive. But they had each other. They had Liam. They had a second chance. Not everyone was lucky enough to get. And sometimes, that was all it took to begin again. This story reminds us that real love isn't never making mistakes. It's having the courage to admit mistakes and fight to fix them. That women deserve respect and love, and nobody has the right to treat them like trash no matter who they are. That second chances are precious gifts. Not everyone deserves them. And if you're given one, you've got to hold it with your whole heart. And that family isn't only blood. It's the people who choose to love you, protect you, and stand beside you when the whole world turns its back. Thank you for staying with us all the way to the end of Amelia, Kieran, and baby Liam's story. If this story touched your heart, if you cried with Amelia, felt angry at Gianna, and smiled when they found their way back to each other, please give us a like and share this video with the people you love. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss more emotional stories every day. We'd truly love to hear what you feel from the deepest part of your heart. What do you think about this story? Do you believe in second chances in love? Have you ever met someone like Amelia, strong enough to survive hardship without losing her dignity? Share with us in the comments below. We read every single comment and we value every single one. Finally, we wish all of you watching this video strong health, a life filled with love and happiness every day, and that you always find peace in your heart. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.